An icy dawn rolled out across the Svalbard archipelago, spreading lavender and pale gold light over a labyrinth of jagged sea ice. In the half-haze before sunrise, every ridge and pressure crack gleamed like hammered glass, and the Arctic Ocean exhaled slow curls of vapor that drifted upward, carrying the faint scent of salt and ancient cold. The expedition ship Aurora Zephyr lay at anchor just beyond the frozen shelf, its hull creaking softly with each swell that nudged against the floe. On the forward deck, a film crew bundled in down parkas hurried from crate to crate, their words lost in the hiss of the wind and the metallic clack of gear being locked into place. They had come north chasing a single idea: to capture a lingering, intimate portrait of the world's greatest ice hunter before climate change pushed that world to the edge of memory. Producer Wyatt Lansing stood by the rail, breath fogging, notebook fluttering in the gusts. He was a former war correspondent who wore worry like a scarf. But here, on what felt like the last unbroken frontier, his eyes sparkled with something close to wonder. Across the white horizon, a lone polar bear sow was padding between hummocks, big shoulders rolling under fur that absorbed the dawn and returned it in honeyed glow. Wyatt lifted a wrist mic and murmured into it, his voice bristling with excitement. In the wheelhouse, Director of Photography Keiko Mori responded with an equally hushed reply, giving the go-ahead to launch their newest aerial workhorse, a carbon fiber UAV christened Snowhawk. The drone's casing gleamed gunmetal against the snow. Rotor blades remained strapped in red neoprene sleeves to keep them from becoming brittle in the -30 air. Beside the craft, tech lead Javi Gomez knelt with a toolbox, fingers wrapped in heated gloves as he tightened the gimbal clamp around a lightweight 8K cinema camera. Javi's heartbeat had steadied drones through sandstorms in the Gobi and typhoons in the Philippine Sea. Still, he regarded the cold with a kind of reverence. Plastic and lithium both turned temperamental out here, and the smallest crack could become a catastrophe that plummeted payloads into crevasses no rope could reach. First Assistant Camilla Ortiz clipped a diagnosis tablet to the fuselage, eyes scanning voltage readouts. The battery they'd chosen for this flight was new, rated for sub-zero operation and almost absurdly dense, an experimental pack on loan from a Norwegian startup. It weighed half of what their older packs did, yet promised twice the endurance. With each tap on the touchscreen, she confirmed cell balance, internal resistance, discharge curves. Green lights returned across the board. The sow in the distance paused to nose at a wind-carved drift. Already her presence altered the rhythm of the crew. Wyatt's voice came through tight on the comms. They needed a wide establishing shot of her silhouette against the russet dawn. Something meditative, almost poetic. Keiko wanted a slow autonomous orbit at 50 meters altitude, drifting sideways to reveal the enormity of the landscape around one solitary bear. No swoops, no sudden movements, just the hush of rotor blades and the soft communion of machine and predator. Javi and Camilla hefted Snowhawk onto the launch sled, a low aluminum platform studded with black rubber grips. Twin heaters blasted warm air beneath the airframe to keep the flight computer above critical operating temperature. Javi keyed in the initialization code, and gyros purred as the drone awoke. LEDs winked lime green along the arms. Out over the frozen gulf, the sow ambled, still unaware. They launched. Snowhawk rose with a muted whir, rotors beating a crisp cadence that reminded Wyatt of a distant wasp's nest. Ice crystals swirled in a spiral column beneath it, sparkling against the sunrise. Once clear of the deck, the drone flattened its ascent and glided east. Keiko guided it with feather-light joysticks, coaxing a painter's brushstroke across the sky. On the monitor inside the wheelhouse, the bear's outline appeared, backlit by the sun's first bright shard. Her breath steamed silver, drifting away in slow halos. For 6 minutes the flight was perfection. Each pass carved footage that shimmered with quiet majesty, the iridescent curve of the bear's fur, the wide emptiness folding outward in every direction, the long shadow that stretched behind her like a dark river. Keiko eased in closer to frame the amber glow in her eyes, capturing the minute quiver of black lips as the sow tasted wind for the scent of seals beneath the ice. Everything about the scene felt fragile and unscripted, exactly what the documentary needed. Then the wind shifted. A shallow cross breeze funneled between the ice ridges and struck Snowhawk broadside. The drone bucked, reoriented, bucked again. Keiko corrected, but the gust had unsettled more than the machine. The tiny pitch and rotor pitch emitted a new note that pinged across the ice. The bear's ears snapped forward. She lifted her head, nostrils flaring. In that instant, the gulf between curiosity and annoyance vanished. Her body language shifted, muscles coiling, forequarters sinking, an age-old hunting stance transposed onto modern irritation. Wyatt whispered a warning, but sound couldn't outrun inevitability. With startling speed, the sow rose onto her hind legs, swatting at something that hung in the air far above her reach. The drone, 50 meters up, floated on an invisible string she seemed determined to yank. Keiko began a slow climb, hoping altitude would dissolve the bear's interest. For a heartbeat it worked. The sow dropped onto all fours and huffed, pacing a tight semicircle. Then she charged, not at the sky but at the thin airstrip of glare ice that ran beneath the drone's path. Keiko's monitor bloomed with telemetry. Wind 15 knots, gusting 22, battery at 81%. Javi called out the numbers with the calm of a surgeon. Camilla plotted a banked withdrawal back to the ship. But the drone's camera view told a different story. A bright splash of white fur barreling forward, claws scoring deep trenches as the sow skidded and leapt in a spray of powdered snow. She slammed shoulder first into an ice hummock. The impact sent a tremor through the crust, and the resulting vibration was enough to confuse the drone's inertial sensors. Snowhawk drifted sideways, its autopilot chasing phantom accelerations. Javi switched to manual override. At exactly that moment, a second gust knifed across the flow, drew cold breath through the gimbal mount, and bit down hard on the battery pack. Internal resistance skyrocketed, voltage sagged in a blink. The motors screamed to compensate. The drone pitched forward violently, and for 2 terrible seconds it dropped. Recaptured lift, dropped again. Wyatt cursed, gripping the rail until his knuckles went white. Camilla increased power draw to stabilize. The sagging battery rebounded but punished them with a thermal spike. Javi's thermal overlay glowed orange, then red. Alarm chimes erupted. They were at risk of a runaway cell, a catastrophic thermal event. But killing power mid-air guaranteed a crash. And a crash meant death for a camera worth more than a suburban house. Keiko flared the drone's nose into the wind to stall its descent. Snowhawk hovered uncertainly, 18 meters above the ice. Below, the bear swung her head side to side, tracking its every move. Her breath billowed in ragged plumes. Another snarl tore from her throat. The crew's handheld microphones picked up none of the tension, only the drone's distant hum and the crackle of their own boots on deck. Wyatt's voice dropped to a hush, as though the bear might overhear a single tremor of fear. His instinct as a storyteller told him the scene had become legend in the making. But legend came at a price. And the price right now was measured in sparks ready to arc inside a battery tinier than a paperback novel. Javi called for an immediate return. Camilla mapped the shortest path home. 1,500 meters, line of sight. They would spin in a wide backward-facing arc to keep the gimbal pointed at the bear, to salvage some of the tension for the edit bay even as they retreated. Keiko brought the throttle to maximum safe output. The battery sagged worse. 90 meters into the run, voltage plunged past critical. One rotor stalled, recovered, stalled harder. The flight computer choked on the asymmetrical thrust and forced a motor cut to prevent torque roll. Snowhawk yawed like a drunk marionette, nosedived in slow motion, and smacked against an ice ridge with a hollow clatter that rolled across the flow like falling dominoes. Plastic shrapnel ricocheted. The camera sheared clean from the gimbal and skidded to a rest. The drone's body bounced once, settled, broken, still, dancing above the wreckage. A faint fizz of electrolyte hissed as the battery vented its frustration into the frigid air. Silence followed, the quiet so sudden it made Wyatt's ears ring. Keiko exhaled a single syllable that might have been a prayer or a curse. Camilla's hands trembled over the controller, knuckles cracking. They all stared at the fallen machine as though it were a wounded comrade stranded behind enemy lines. The sow halted 10 paces from the wreck. Her nose lifted. Whatever chemical cocktail was escaping the ruined battery. She smelled it, tasted it on the wind. Curiosity trumped caution. She stepped forward, massive paws crunching through a brittle rind of snow. She circled the debris, sniffed the carbon fiber arms, prodded the lens with delicate claws. Something in the venting gas tickled her throat. She snorted, shook her head, and for a moment the crew believed the scent would repel her. Instead, she dropped her muzzle and began licking. Keiko's breath caught. Lithium salts had a faintly metallic tang, alien, almost intriguing to an animal that licked ice and chewed desiccated kelp. The sow's tongue traced the battery case in lazy laps, tasting each smoking crevice. Minutes earlier those cells had hovered at -10 degrees. Now their exothermic purge warmed them. Warmth out here was treasure, and she accepted the gift without hesitation. Javi rummaged for binoculars, trying to spot the bright warning label he'd stuck on the pack, a red triangle and the word fatal in 6 languages. He found it. The triangle rested beneath the bear's jaw. The label's edges crinkled and peeled against her saliva. She rumbled with satisfaction. Wyatt's voice cracked as he radioed the bridge. Captain Sigrid Hofstad patched an emergency alert to the Norwegian Polar Institute headquarters, requesting advice. They responded with a single chilling directive: do not approach. If the battery breached inside the bear's digestive system, it would deliver a lethal dose of heavy metals and acid, but any attempt to retrieve it could provoke a fatal encounter for the crew. Down on the ice, the sow worried the casing with her teeth. Plastic gave way. A sliver of silver foam poked out. She lipped at it, exploring the texture, the faint taste of salt that lingered on the composite. Lithium polymer packets lay exposed like shiny seaweed. With one decisive motion she tilted her great head and swallowed the entire pack. 30 meters away, the lens sheared from the gimbal continued to record, its buffer overloaded with static and shards of ice dust. It would be days before the crew reviewed that footage and saw the precise moment the battery disappeared past the bear's black gums, sealed by a curl of her broad pink tongue. On the Aurora Zephyr deck, nobody spoke. The wind returned, keening across the railings. Javi lowered the binoculars and closed his eyes. He envisioned the battery's foil pack expanding in the bear's stomach acids. Imagined the trace elements leaching into tissue. A sickening guilt tugged at him. Equipment can be replaced, but they had crossed an invisible line between documentation and harm. Wyatt recovered first. He barked orders, voice raw. Keiko pulled focus trackers from the control panel. Camilla initiated a system wipe to secure data. They moved with automatic stiffness, as if following choreography drilled into muscle memory. Yet each gesture carried a tremor of disbelief. Commander Danielle Brooks, the expedition's field medic, emerged from below deck with a satellite phone pressed to one ear. She scribbled notes on a waterproof pad, relaying toxicology data to a veterinarian back in Tromsø. The vet's verdict was bleak: if the bear passed the battery intact, she might survive. If the casing ruptured even partially, she would suffer agonizing internal burns. Time was measured in hours. But there was one improbable strategy: coax the bear into ingesting a purgative. Get her to vomit or pass the pack before dissolution. And if they could recover it quickly, the battery might remain sealed, its destruction prevented, the bear spared. Javi, Camilla, Wyatt, and Keiko locked eyes. A plan convened in the charged silence. Salmon thawed in the galley freezer. Pharmaceutical-grade polyethylene glycol sat in the medical kit, standard-issue laxative for crew stuck in dry food routines. They would mince the fish, soak it in laxative, and deliver the bait at a safe distance while the sow still lingered near the crash site. But ice dynamics would complicate everything. At any moment pressure ridges could shift, cracking a path between ship and bear into impassable bergy chaos. Captain Hofstad warned that winds were freshening. Within the hour katabatic squalls could rip through and drive floes apart. They had to move now. The deck transformed into a triage line. Keiko fetched a spare DSLR to record the salvage attempt. Part of her already anticipated the moral subplot that would run under the documentary's final act. Camilla stripped the auxiliary drone for an emitter beacon. They needed to tag the battery once it surfaced so retrieval would be swift. Wyatt scribbled narration ideas in his battered notebook, but his eyes stayed fixed on the bear, committing her every movement to memory. Below decks, Javi assembled a remote sled, a low-profile rover normally used to shuttle microphones across delicate snowscapes. He replaced its parabolic mic holder with a detachable bait tray rigged with a quick-release latch. The rover's drivetrain hummed as he ran diagnostics. Batteries read full. Treads were rated to -50. Range was 300 meters. It would have to be enough. Camilla diced salmon until her gloves dripped pink juice. Then folded each cube into a slurry of peg and water warmed to body temperature. The mixture smelled briny, oddly sweet. She poured it into flexible sachets and sealed them with heat pliers. When Javi lowered one into the bait tray, it steamed faintly against the Arctic air. Tiny wisps twisting upward. Wyatt tapped the captain's shoulder and pointed aft. A shallow lead of open water had begun to yawn between the ship and ice shelf. In an hour that gap might double, fracturing their line of escape. They had to launch the rover now or not at all. With a nod from Captain Hofstad, the mission lurched into motion. Keiko stationed herself at the starboard rail. Camera pressed to her eye. Tracking every second, Javi placed the rover on an access plank that spanned the forming lead, a narrow board slick with ice spray. The machine whirred forward, treads clattering against the wood. One slip and it would vanish into seawater so cold it could seize machinery solid in under a minute. Across the fractured plane, the sow nosed at the shattered drone again. A few pieces crunched beneath her teeth, bits of carbon fiber. Shards from the camera's filter glass. She seemed half interested, half bored now, as though the novelty of the crash had worn thin. Javi coaxed the rover off the plank and onto flatter ice. It trundled forward, servo motors whining but steady. The scent of salmon traveled in lazy arcs on the breeze. The sow lifted her head. Her eyes narrowed, nostrils palpating. She stepped over the battered drone and cast about. Triangulating, the rover advanced 20 meters. Then 20 more, leaving a faint ribbon of tread marks. At 60 meters, Javi paused it. Deployed the bait tray's lid. Warm fog plumed upward as salmon aroma collided with Arctic cold. The bear swung her head. Sniffed again. Without hesitation she altered course toward the rover. Lumbering with surprising grace for an animal her size. The earth seemed to pulse beneath each footfall. Keiko zoomed in tight on her face. The camera's sensor pulsed with focus motors struggling in low light. But at last they resolved clarity. Watery amber eyes. Black leather nose crusted with ice. Beads of frozen breath clinging to fur. Javi's drones had never felt fear. But the rover's data stream transmitted acceleration spikes. Micro shudders as if the machine itself sensed impending doom. He backed it up a meter so that the bait sat clear on the ice. Then he toggled the quick release. The tray's bottom door fell away, dropping sachets of salmon into the snow with the softest plop. He reversed the rover. Slow, careful not to jar electronics. The bear reached the bait within moments. She sniffed, nosed a sachet. The film crew held their breath. Her jaws closed delicately around the fish-filled packet and she began to chew. Tearing open the membrane, pink flesh and peg slurry oozed over her tongue. She swallowed greedily. Another sachet followed, then a third. Camilla mouthed a silent plea. Wyatt filmed her behind-the-scenes reaction with his phone. This would later serve as raw testimony inside the story's emotional arc. They waited 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. The bear merely licked the snow, searching for stray droplets of salmon juice. Then licked her muzzle clean. Veterinarian instructions predicted onset within 20 minutes. If successful, the sow would feel abdominal urgency, retreat downwind, and pass the pack hole. But there was no guarantee. Lithium packs were notorious for bloating in GI tracts. A small leak could still rupture. The crew could only observe. Wind rose. Snow devils spun across the ice. The lead between ship and floe stretched wider. Groaning, Captain Hofstad shouted over the gusts. Retrieval teams needed to get ready now if they hoped to board the ice later. Wyatt argued they stay. To sail away was to condemn the bear. But the captain reminded him of international safety code. A ship trapped in newly forming pack ice could tear her hull open. They had minutes left before protocol forced withdrawal. The sow snuffled once more at the bait site, then ambled off toward a maze of ridges. She paused to scratch at her belly. A sign the laxative might be working. Hope flickered. Wyatt spun on the deck, scanning for volunteers willing to step onto the floe once the bear moved far enough away. Javi raised his hand, so did Camilla. Keiko hesitated, then nodded. Danielle Brooks zipped her medic's bag and joined them. 5 souls against the Arctic. Betting they could sprint across unstable ice, scoop up a possible bomb, and retreat before either bear or sea swallowed them whole. The captain's voice boomed orders for survival suits, flare pistols, VHF radios. Men unlashed a Zodiac dinghy, prepared to shuttle the team across the widening lead. They rigged a belay line to haul themselves back if the ice cracked further. Wyatt's pulse drummed in his throat. He wondered whether future viewers would feel the same mixture of dread and devotion that burned through him now. He hoped so. The story deserved to matter. Far downwind, the sow halted beside an ice mound luminous in sunrise gold. She hunched, back arching. A throaty grunt rolled across the plain. Then another. Steam coiled upward. A moment passed that felt elastic with tension. Something dark plopped onto the snow. Round and wet. She pawed at it, snorted, patted away disinterested once more, vanishing behind a ridge. From the deck, Javi's binoculars captured a flash of silver in that dark pile, smooth, metallic, unmistakable. The battery pack lay half buried in churned snow. Intact. Wyatt shouted go, and the retrieval team vaulted into the waiting dinghy. The outboard sputtered, caught, roared. They skidded across the lead's slush channel toward the floe. 3 minutes later they leapt onto ice. Crampons biting, wind snarled and tried to hurl them backward. But they crouched low, balancing axes and dry bags. Camilla reached the battery first. It steamed gently in the sub-freezing air. She brushed snow aside, revealing the warning triangle Javi had placed earlier. No punctures, no bulges. Miracle. She slid it into a heavy plastic jar lined with absorbent pads laced in neutralizing powder. Then sealed the lid. Danielle snapped chemical indicator strips across the casing. No leaks detected. Javi raised a flare, signal accomplished, while Keiko swung her camera in a broad arc, capturing the moment. In that jubilant hum of adrenaline, none of them noticed the fissure opening beneath their feet. A muffled crack cracked like a rifle shot. Danielle's knee buckled as the ice shelf lurched, edges tearing upward. Wyatt screamed to move. They bolted back toward the dinghy, hearts hammering. Behind them the fissure widened, swallowing the bait tray, the rover, and a chunk of ridge before grinding to a stop. They boarded the dinghy, engines firing, and carved back to the Aurora Zephyr as a chorus of splintering echoed in their wake. On deck, crew hauled them aboard, battery jar and all. Captain Hofstad rammed engines forward, turning south toward open water. The ship's hull shuddered but found free path. They left the floe behind, drifting like a bruised cathedral under the growing winds. Only when they reached relative calm did Javi set the jar on a steel workbench and exhale. Camilla slumped beside him, tears freezing on her cheeks. Keiko lowered her camera, arms shaking. Wyatt closed his notebook and simply stared at the cresting waves. Words beyond even him for the first time in years. Somewhere back on the shifting ice, the sow lifted her head to the new day. Belly lighter, agitation gone, she trudged onward, a ghost on the white expanse, unaware of the tiny battle waged between human ingenuity and human folly, and of the fragile victory now sealed inside a jar. Humming softly like a captured storm, the Aurora Zephyr steamed south. Crew huddled over heaters and coffee urns, while hard drives filled with hours of footage spun quietly below decks. They had come to tell the story of a changing Arctic, but the Arctic had told them a story of its own. How curiosity can shatter boundaries. How technology must bow to nature's brute resilience. And how redemption sometimes smells like thawed salmon and laboratory laxatives on the breath of a great white bear.